Brilliant. Right. Brilliant. I'm Chris Roberts. I work for SAP, software company. So for those that haven't seen me present here before, we manage 100,000 Windows 10. We've been Windows 10 since 15.11 version, so you can get an idea of how vast our Windows 10 estate is. I work in endpoint management as a solutions architect. Twitter's on that slide there if you want to follow me. I normally post up things that we're doing within our environment, and if you've got any questions, feel free to fire them at me via Twitter. Today, what I want to talk about is something we've done with our Autopilot experience for our end users, and that is, we'd call this about timing our provisioning. Because let's go and have a look at our first slide and go in. I think we all like stats in our environment, and definitely my management like reporting. They like to be able to see what's happening in our environment and how our introduction to Autopilot is working and how we can improve things as well. Now, with a task sequence, this was really easy for us because everything was in order. And as well as that, Config Manager produces us good reports on this anyway, as well. And because it's working in order, we can actually look at very specific steps and how long all those individual steps are taking. It's easy to define the start and end of that task sequence. And as I say, these reporting options are already in there, so you can go and have a look and you can see how long your OSD task sequences are taking. Autopilot is a little bit harder for us, actually, because we're actually handing over a device to our end users and saying, hey, take this, off you go. We don't know when they start it. We don't know when it ends. And actually what we can't do then is actually see if we make a change to our Autopilot, if we put new profiles in, if we change new applications, we can't tell you exactly how long this is going to take and what change that makes. And as well as that, what we don't know is we don't know, I don't know how many people are using Autopilot here, but one of the things we find is some of the apps sometimes just do not install for whatever reason. What we've done to address this is to actually start looking at reporting and how we do this. I mean, we're a global operation, so not all locations are equal. I think we've already touched on it down here about the fact that bandwidth. What's the bandwidth in that location over there? We actually may not know. Or we may not know how much bandwidth is available. So not all these networks are equal. And what happens when we make that change? When we add that new application in, how long is that added to our process for our end users? And also then, what can we learn from these different locations? Is this location, say, over in Sydney, doing something completely different and it's improving their Autopilot by, say, 5 minutes? We need to know that information. And also, we want to capture the success rate. And we also want to capture anything that's failing as well, because when it starts failing, we want to know. Right, so I'm going to touch on the ESP. I know Rob did a job there on the ESP. I know Michael's going to go on the ESP, but I'm going to actually show you how we're using the ESP as well in this. If you stop at the ESP and you basically block everybody in the ESP, like Rob said, this may not be for you, what we're going to discuss here. It may be something, though, you want to look at in the future. If you're using SCCM to install additional apps afterwards, so if you're going down the real co-managed route, actually this would help you out, because it'll show you when those apps can install and when that process is finished. The blocking apps. We see it on the slide there with the ESP, the fact that you've got you can block on all apps, or you can choose to actually just select a couple of apps to block the ESP on. You know there's as a group, anybody who's tried this, do you know there's no priority on those blocking apps? Yeah, so we know needs to come. Hopefully we're going to see it soon. We have spoke about this with blocking apps taking priority over other apps. But because of that, actually, you don't know when it's going to stop in the process, when it's going to start, etc. So it could be that if you've got 10 apps being installed out of Intune, your 2 blocking apps are actually going to install last. So it actually installs all 10 apps straight away. Our needs as a company was to get the user to the desktop as soon as possible. There's a reason for that, actually, is because we say to our users now, what do you want to use first? Outlook. I want to go and answer this email. I've seen an email come through on my phone and I need to answer this. Go to outlook.com then, because we're all O365. There is Exchange in the cloud, so go and actually have a look at that. So we can get them to the desktop as soon as possible. They can actually start using their machine, even though the autopilot process hasn't totally finished. So as I say there, the web apps are the key. One of the things we do is, because of this, we skip the ESP for the user part of the configuration. So where Rob showed that up, there's actually a key that you can use. Anybody that wants that, you can actually skip that user part of the configuration. The reason why we keep them in the other part of it, because if you don't, in the device configuration, the machine rename, etc., can cause issues. Right? So we actually keep them in the ESP device and then skip out the user part. Faster to the desktop, but blocking apps are still an issue. And it allows us to configure some goodness, right? So we can disable the consumer experience, etc., but they're on that ESP as soon as possible. Right, so how do we go about then timing our provisioning? First of all, we listed out the apps that we know have got to be installed. We need to know what those applications are. That's the first part. It's what's important to us. Right. First thing we have to do is we have to script, write in an approximate start time into this. I'm going to put approximate. You could do it really, really accurately. If you want to go in and actually look at the events, you can grab that and you can pinpoint exactly when that process started. All right. The reason why we don't, and again, Michael may touch on this later, but we've spoke about this, and that is sometimes that time can shift on your machine. If you pull a machine out of the box, there's no saying it's going to be in the same time zone and that the time hasn't shifted on the machine. So instead, actually, what we do is we use a PowerShell profile script, and we write that, and actually what we do is we use a network time service to write that in. So in other words, I can actually guarantee that if we go off to a network time API, it's actually going to be the time and UTC. We store it in UTC and we put it into the registry. That's the first thing we do. Okay. We also record network information and status at this point. So what we're doing is we're actually recording the network that users are actually configuring it on as well. So what we can do is we can actually compare different versions of our corporate network. We record their IP address as well, so we can see what subnet they're writing it on. Being careful, obviously, to make sure you're compliant with GDPR rules, etc., what you're recording for your end users. But we record that information in. Right, next stage. Right, so now the user's logged onto the desktop, or at least they've got into their device settings. So at this point, we've got a Win32 application. If you ever want to know about creating Win32 applications, Jerry's your man there. Does some great sessions here before on Win32s. But what we do is we create a Win32 application. And what this is going to do is it's going to do two stages. Right, first of all, it's going to copy just the files that we need in order to record the length of time it takes for the process of Autopilot to work. The other thing we do is we set up a scheduled task into the machine. So we inject a scheduled task that runs on the user logon. That means when the user logs in, what we're going to do is we're going to actually now be able to start measuring. And then what we do with that, the user's logged in we actually set it every 2 minutes. That means there's going to be a 2-minute leeway. You can actually choose to set it every minute. You can choose to set it to run every 30 seconds if you want. But we're trying to kind of like, this isn't about being deadly accurate with our results. This is about giving us ideas of how long different locations are taking.
The script for the approximate start time, how do you know it's going to run early enough?
Right, because the configuration profiles run before the actual Win32s. Because it's a device configuration profile. As I said to you, it's an approximate start time, right? I can't guarantee when that's going to run in the process. But normally what we found is within a few minutes. And also what it does, it gives us then a guidance on roughly, hey, we know this is one of the first ones that runs as a configuration profile. And we know now that everything that runs afterwards would be a guidance off of that. As I say, what we're not doing here is this is not deadly accurate. If you wanted that, you're going to have to, there's an event ID that happens. I've probably got it in my notes somewhere so I can tell you, and you can go and search in the event log and do it that way. By the way, all the code we got for this I've made available so you'll see later. And we'll go through all the code. The only other thing that we do is I've got burnt toast, right, running. Now, depending upon how your company feels about you using modules from the internet depends on what you do here. Now, because I like to go to our security department and say, hey, we use a very particular version of this that we've checked through the code for. So what we do is we actually copy that manually as a module over to PowerShell. In the example that I'm going to give you, though, that we've got here, instead what it'll do is it just install the module for you for Burnt Toast. Has anybody used Burnt Toast in any of their scripts at all? Okay, so it's toast notifications. So the user can actually see the progress that their Autopilot is making from the start. Then the final part, collecting the data. We just make a configuration MOF file change in SCCM. Now, if you're pure Intune, you're going to have to find other ways to collect this data. But you're going to see that it's going to be set up, and it's going to add it to classes, and then we can go and actually produce reports in SCCM. We'll go and have a look. How does this work then? Let's quickly go through. So the configuration PowerShell script, this is what we were talking about with Jerry there, records the start time. That's the first thing that happens. So we've got start time for the client. The next thing, the Intune Win32 app. This actually always comes after configuration profile scripts are installed. So this will be the next stage. We go in and delivers the content and the scheduled task onto the system. As the next step, as they say, we run it every 2 minutes. You can adjust that. I'll show you where to adjust it a bit later, but you can make it so it's going to check installed applications every 2 minutes and records the status. And then when the device is complete, the user's notified. The time that that completion happened is recorded. We also record the total time it took to record, so we don't have to do any calculations out within SQL statements, etc. If you don't want to, makes it nice and easy. And by the way, it also does all this to a log file as well on the machine, so that if you've got a second level, first level support guy that wants to see, hey, one of the applications didn't install, they can actually go in the log file and it's going to be clear as anything. It's going to show them exactly which application didn't install. Okay, and then as the final part, hardware inventory, we're there. How do we start doing this then? Right, so the first part, we use an XML. I've created an XML in order so that what you can do is you can actually go and choose what apps you want. And I've also, so 3 types of software that we're going to look for, or 3 checks that we can do for software within the tool that I've created here. Number 1, install product. Originally, actually, we was using the install Win32 class. We find that there was some missing, and then we went to use the install product. And then when we did this, we found out that that actually creates another WMI call, which you'll see a load of events happening from. So instead, what we did is we switched over and we used the get package. Okay, so it just uses a get package, gets the list of the packages out. And then we've got an installed log file. So in other words, if it doesn't get created into the get package and you can't see it in there, we can actually check a log file. We can check for certain entries in that log file to see what happened. And then the final one is we've got installed store. So if you're doing things like company portal from the store, you can actually check to make sure that's been installed as well. So you've got a check setting in here. So you've got the item check and then you've got the check setting. That's actually what it's going to be looking for from the get package. It doesn't match, so you don't have to be exact with the name. So you can actually just choose the first part of the name and be happy with it. I don't do any version checking in there either as well, so it makes it a bit more evergreen. So that if you suddenly get a new version, like we use the F5 big IP client, new version comes out, what we don't have to do is go and edit this XML file. We can look for an entry in the log file, so we're looking for a particular string of text in there. So you may be looking for the success message at the end. So here's an example of that. And then finally, or the name of the in-store app, so whatever the name of the store app is at the end. Display name. I use this for friendly names for the login. It's in there, so particularly useful for the store apps, where it'd be Microsoft.company portal with no spaces. So we use that, and then that gets injected into the log file. And then finally, I'll touch on this, a score for the application. You'll probably see from here 1, 2, 4, 8, 16. Right, reason why we do that is because we collect that into SCCM. That means that if an application suddenly stops installing, I can actually tell you which application on all of our clients isn't actually installing without having to have the log files or anything. So in other words, if it's the last one, so for instance, we've got a maximum score there, You can see the global settings at the top. 255 is the maximum score that it can be. So in other words, if it's the last one, it'd be 127, say. So if we were missing, if we get recording 128 in all of our files, I can say, oh, 127, okay. So we need to go and have a look. If we've got 127 being scored, I can actually go and highlight and say, right, we know which application isn't installing properly. Useful if you're releasing a new application. So you can instantly go and see whether that is actually coming in. I say instantly, it's based upon the hardware inventory, but you'll get some early indicators. And you can may see patterns as well. Perhaps a certain app not installing in a certain location. We have issues with using Autopilot in China, as an example. DNS poisoning. They causes us huge issues, or has done in the past. So I touch on it here. Yeah, you can see it. Give each application a score. 1, 2, 4. You know, we all know. Hopefully, we all know some level of binary, and that relates to a binary position of the thing. We put these against the apps in the XML. We add these up to get the total score, and we record this each time it executes as well. So we're always constantly updating the registry to say, hey, this time we've got X amount. This time we've got X amount. This time we've got X amount. Did say, why don't we just count the applications? It does actually, by the way. The application does count the amount of applications we need to get installed. But ultimately, as I say, SCCM, we can quickly identify issues. And that's why we kept this. I'm trying to think of ways in which I can work around this at the moment, but I haven't thought of a good way yet. So it remains in what we've written here. Okay, so let's show you the code, because I think we all prefer code to seeing a load of slides. So first of all, I spoke about the first one, and this is actually the script that we inject as a PowerShell profile. Don't worry, later on, I'll show you where all the code is. And hopefully Rob will push the slides out later as well. But I do put a header in all my code so you can see, etc., and any versions that change, I'll also tend to write into the code. But this part here, that's really the part you're really going to look at here, and that's where the log file is for it, where you want to store a log file, and then finally the registry location that you want to write the keys to. So you can customize it to your own needs there. And then the only other thing is I've got some functions that are common across all the scripts for CM Trace compatible login, because you don't want to go through and manual log files. Hey, just use CM Trace for it. I roll over the log files as well. So again, common across them all. You can change the size. I've got it set at 100K in it. I roll over the log files. So it keeps 2 versions of the log file all the time. And then the only thing this is doing, as I said, first one, the initialization stage, we go through. First of all, in order so it doesn't constantly keep obliterating the registry keys, I check to see if the start time already exists. If it already exists, then we're happy that this has already run once and it won't rerun it. That means if you put a new version of the script up, it's not going to wipe it out on all the machines that already have it. Right, then the next thing, as I say, we use the well time API. We go off to the API, we do a get. We convert it to the UTC as well, because if you work from UTC, it's a lot easier than, obviously, the time zone on all the systems. You can replace that if you want. And then we convert that to something that we can then use within string date comparison in PowerShell. And then we write that to the registry. And then the final thing that I said we do is we get the net connection profile, and then we write some of the network information in. Name of the network that was being used, the interface details, and the IP address. I think it's useful information for us, hopefully useful to you as well. Right, so we've done that, and then we've now going to go to the point where it's going to run the Win32 that's going to inject all this onto the machine. Off it goes. Again, variables at the top. I always put my script version there, so it writes it into the log file, so I know that if I'm debugging, I can find out which version of the script's on the machine, because we've got multiple versions out there, because we've got a good ring concept within SAP. But ultimately, there you can see, I'm writing it to a destination, the files onto the machine, and then also I give it a name for the task, so you can call it whatever you want, but as in here, it's SAP, because obviously we know then it relates to us. Again, it's the same functions for login that we're all used to. By the way, do I need to zoom in at all? I should have asked that. But you can get the code elsewhere. And then it's just a case we've got a script that's going to pre-stage all the files onto the machine, and that's it. Again, login happens. The only thing I've done here, this is a bit customized for us. I've got an option just to pre-stage the files onto the machine. Now, I've had to do that because this post-dates us releasing Autopilot. So I had a number of devices that didn't have this on it. And the reason for that is I've got a detection method within the Win32 app. So let's just go and have a look at that part, actually. Wrong screen. Right. So within the Win32 app, when I set this up, basically executing PowerShell, because this is my dev version, I do it unrestricted. The code's not signed on here, so I can quickly update it. And then we just start the copy of the Autopilot as this. That's going to copy it, and it's going to put the task on. I say the key is actually in the detection rules because I detect the presence of the files on the system, the PowerShell files. So that's why that pre-stage existed, purely so I could get around the fact that once I released this, I didn't want a pop-up appearing on, I think something like 1,500 systems that predate this script. So I had to be a little bit careful on that one. And then the final thing is it will go through, it's going to pre-stage, and then it's going to register the scheduled task that's going to run on the machine. The scheduled task is set up using an XML file that's a part of the application. So you can see here we have an XML called autopilot sched-task.xml. You can go and make adjustments. This is where I say if you want it to run every minute, if you want it to run every 30 seconds, that's the file that you want to be editing. You can make the adjustments there, and you can get it to run however you want. The only thing I'd say is be careful because it obviously takes so much time to run to get the list of packages, etc. And then once it's done that, then the final part is when the user logs on. Again, variables at the top for everything that happens here, but slightly more depth in this one, in the fact that we have a few functions. I said we'll check the installed product, so we can actually go through. Now, the only thing I'd say on this one is when I do the get package, rather than doing it as part of the function and checking it every time, I put that into an array so that I'm not constantly having to pull data off the machine. And then we just check the array for whether the package exists. We've got the check installed log file that we spoke about there. And then finally, we have a check Windows Store function. Now, what we do within the app, there is another thing that we do within the app. First of all, we go and get the time that we're executing and everything for future use. Then the only other thing we do is check to make sure the start time exists, just in case anything's happened with that first script. And at this point, we'll write it if it didn't exist, gone.
Just mention last assignment, our previous network provider and IT support outfit, they actually blocked the NTP servers so we couldn't verify time. It was actually through the team. So they blocked time and every autopilot device would fail no matter what and just sit there doing nothing. And then if you look, you can get like a 50 machines, 100 machines. You just realise that some are one time, some are another time. It's very, very just a checklist for you to check before you do the deployment, or if you've got someone on the desk doing it for you. That doing the simple things first are very, very important.
Interesting, cool. Which means actually I probably need to adjust this code at some point just to do some try and catches on that actually, just because it'll give you an idea. It's a really good point. Another valid point actually on that as well is time's shifting while you're doing autopilot, which it can. We spoke to Michael actually about this in the past as well, and guys at Microsoft. If you're connecting to an AP that's going to actually issue a certificate or a time-based entry into a network, so we do it on our guest network at SAP. Actually, what can happen is it can then shift the time to be either after or before your certificate is supposed to allow you onto the network. And then what happens is your autopilot just sits there because it loses the network halfway through the process. And we had it so the clients could automatically update the time themselves. And actually what we've done is, and now remove that functionality, and we actually add it back in later on. So using the same technique as well, by the way, with scheduled tasks. One thing you could take away from this, even if you don't want to use this, right, is actually using that scheduled task technique, copying files over and then triggering a scheduled task can get you out of a lot of sticky situations with autopilot devices. So it could be a framework actually here that you could build upon and think, actually, you know what, we could do this by that technique. It's worth noting.
I think every environment was different where I've been.
Yeah.
So some different use.
Okay, so yeah, then the only other thing I do here, by the way, rightly or wrongly, is we check the status of the in-tune management extension engine. We've seen this where it just stops. Right. So actually once, it just stops running for whatever reason. Seen it on machine, so actually it's a check to make sure the in-tune management status, in-tune management extension engine is running. If it isn't, it restarts it for you. It's just a little thing. It's that, by the way, took our success rate up from about 75% to about 95%. Just that one little thing that we've discovered. And it's checking it every 2 minutes. If it's running, it won't try and do anything. If it's stopped, it will actually restart it for you. Then it's just a case then of running through the checks. We load in that XML document, we load in the amount of clients that are the amount of checks that are needed, and then we run through the checks as a case statement. So within here, we check the app score, and if the app score doesn't meet that maximum, so in other words, I'm checking out what we got, and then it's going to go, actually I'm going to go through, then I'm going to run the checks. And via a case statement of those checks that we saw there, so it's just going to run through and it's just going to check each application into that. And then it's going to pop up a toast message telling the user the status, the percent that they're up to. And as well as that, tell them if they've actually completed. So if it actually, the current app count equals the total app count, it's going to say, hey, you're completed, well done. Nothing more to do, and we write the registry keys in so we can collect them later. We write that it's been successful. If it isn't, then what we do is we carry on going. And we write a percentage. So we write a percentage status bar using the toast notification. And then the part you don't want to get to, you can. You see we had a thing called the maximum runtime. It's got our set at 10 hours. What we don't want this to do is to carry on continuously on somebody's system. Eventually, you've got to reach a point where you say, actually, this hasn't been successful. Right, we do 10 hours, and then finally, we'll write the fact that it failed as well. We won't write it to the end user because they don't want to see failures. They want to see success. But we'll write it in, we'll collect it, we'll know. We can see patterns in offices, in networks, all of those lot then. So that's what we got. Any questions, anything else on that so far? I don't know how much time I got. Right, we've got 8 minutes. I'm going to switch laptops because we can actually now log into a system that I pre-provisioned up to the user logon stage. And hopefully, if the demo gods are with us today, it will work. Do you know what? After the problems that Jerry had this morning with showing stuff, I prayed, I've done everything, and who knows? Hopefully this could just work. It may not. If it doesn't, we'll switch back to the other network. I will fudge my machine so it looks like it hasn't completed, and we'll show you it running on my system. Okay, so what I've done here is I've gone through the first part of the ESP stage on this machine. So it's gone through, it's set up the device part, and it's now going to switch me into the user part, hopefully. Fingers crossed, if my device power's on. It's coming up that way. Yeah, it's moving. It's Lenovo, come on. So you can see it's got my time there as well, so that could be useful for us. we're not connected to a network. I was going to say I did connect earlier, so go on while we're waiting.
Just for recipe with Autopilot, just doing the app download and then the app install, there's a variable like if it's a surface scope or a slower device, like less than i3 or low memory or slow drive, it's going to take longer. So if you think like a formal pit stop, if you know the hardware type, you average it out half an hour, 45 minutes to an hour. But the older, slower machines can take longer. But if you like get a baseline of device type, maybe model, all those things can add up to the equation. And also, bandwidth, if it's hardwired, it's faster. If it's on Wi-Fi, so you get to access point, and all those little things, the number of apps that you can point. But we found that when there was a session last year with 2-point software, I think they've got the case notes on there, the slides, but we found that hardwired on one VLAN, dedicated bandwidth issue, on other VLANs, they throttle bandwidth, and then if you have desktop optimization, that speeds up the apps slowly because of updates. So it's more, get know the device that you're looking after when you're doing this, or get a small device and new devices, so you get a feel for it. So you can use more. These are things that I learned in the last 6-12 months, which have been different every time. Now I've got a baseline to know if this is that, if this is the other, if it's something else. But it's a pain to go through all this yourself and you have to redo it. If you learn from a few people,
Okay. I'm going to skip my Windows Hello because time will hopefully help us out if we do that. I'm going to hit set up pin and I'm going to cause it an error because that will ask me for MFA. I'm going to skip for now and then we're just going to go straight in. Okay, so at this point, as I say, we're in the user part. This is the point where we'd want our user to the desktop as soon as possible. They can now use Outlook.com, etc., etc., etc. Right, that's what we want. We want them to be there so that they can't say, hey, within 5 minutes, hey, your new machine, I can actually start using it in a semi-productive manner. I will stress that, semi-productive. Now, hopefully, if all's good, the network's here good. So generally what I find is if I'm working, and I tend to work from home an awful lot, and if I'm doing this from home, if I provision a device, it takes about 20 minutes to provision a device. Right. That's all the apps installed. Jerry?
So getting to the user desktop as quickly as possible is good, it's great, but it's still a trade-off with
Yes.
security apps.
100%. 100%. So what we do actually, for our sins, because we don't have control as an endpoint management, because we have our own client protection department, we use McAfee. I won't say what one of my colleagues call it, because we're not allowed to. Okay? But what we do have, though, is sign off from our security department that they are happy with Windows Defender. We are looking towards moving towards Windows Defender. Right. We already use ATP within our environment. We already use Credential Guard. We already use Device Guard. All those things are already configured on the device when it comes out of the device configuration. So you're already in a part that actually you're secure. Hence the reason why we can get our users to the desktop immediately. The other thing that you could do, if you're having to use a third-party application like McAfee, using it quietly. Right, so if you are, you can actually put that in the device configuration stage anyway. So you can actually have that as one of your blocking apps. We have 2 blocking apps. Actually, to get around the blocking apps part as well, by the way, we moved our apps into being user-based deployments because we had to. Because unfortunately, because that blocking, not blocking as such, but blocking out everything and not prioritizing, we ended up moving apps into that stage. It looks like things are going to, actually, of course, because I'm presenting, we may be that things are already installing. And of course, because I'm presenting, you can't see it. because the toast notifications aren't coming up. Normally they'd come up. You can see there, we're actually popping up how long our autopilot is taking, and we're actually now bringing that up in there. I said as well that we would have registry keys, so let's go in and have a look. And it's delivering Office, which takes the longest amount of time. We're currently in negotiations with, so you can see that we're storing the provisioning, everything in here, everything. So hopefully SCCM installing soon. I'll get CM Trace on there and we can have a look at the log file. Okay, if not, I'll switch it back to my other laptop and I'll show you examples of the log file and what actually gets displayed in there. But you can see actually where we're actually pushing it in. Look, it's as I say, look, we're recording the details. So it knows that I actually installed this device in the Microsoft reactor. So, and we see it. We see the people that configure it on their home network. But what we're actually more interested in is the people that use our corporate networks, because we want to see how long is it taking. And we can then relate it back to the country. We can say, right, this person was in the United Kingdom in the corporate network, and for some reason it is taking 1 hour, 20 minutes or something, to install. As I say, if I'm at home, this takes about 20 to 30 minutes maximum for me to provision my device. Has to put Office, it takes most of that time. About 10 minutes actually, installation time for Office. So we get rid of Office, actually, we can nearly half our autopilot time. So the fact that we're negotiating with Lenovo, they're going to pre-install our Office on our autopilot devices, so they pull it out of the box, Office is there. So that carry on installing, that carry on updating those registry keys. That's SCCM installing at the moment, by the way, that pop-up. We do a little bit of a... Do you use the config manager bootstrapping? Do you co-manage at all? No. Anybody co-managing using Autopilot at all? Do you use the config manager bootstrapper? Do you rename your systems? In the ESP, have you set up, in the Autopilot profile, the enrollment profile, have you set up a rename of your system to a standard, to a new template? Right, okay. So this is for you then, right? Because if you do that, right, what happens is that's what causes the reboot between the device and the user configuration stage, is the actual rename of the system. Right? The problem you got that we had with using the config manager package as the bootstrapping package is it will cause the client to reboot, and it doesn't actually detect at what stage it is installing the config manager client. So actually, it can break the config manager client from ever being able to install if it reboots at the wrong point. And it's a hard reboot. It's just going to do it. It's not going to allow things to shut down gracefully. How we got around that is by using the same technique. We inject a scheduled task and we install a config manager afterwards, directly from the client as well. And it's a Win32 app, which means that we can use caching technologies. So I can use a DOINC, or whatever it's called now, but delivery optimization in network cache. And that means because I pulled a whole lot in and I use a /source parameter to install it directly from the client. So just a little tip for you if you come across that and the config manager, if you're co-managing the config manager client isn't installing, just be warned that it can happen. 90% of the time it'll recover because it puts in a retry anyway, and then you reboot and everything just works out. But we were just getting these 10% background failures, and that's where we discovered it. So, yeah, you can see my app score's going up now. We're on 160. It'll keep going up. And let's go and see if config manager's installed. Yeah, so we can get CM Trace and we can go and show you what the log file looks like. And then that'll be it. Okay. Because we're SAP, I store all the files in here. Obviously, you could choose where that goes. And I said there'd be a log file. Easy to see, isn't it? Which ones? You get your second level guy that's saying, oh, I don't know what hasn't installed. There you go and have a look at the log file. It's going to tell you instantly. Yeah. So you can see it actually constantly running through as well. That's what it's going to do. It's going to tell you the number of apps that it's completed, and it's going to just constantly flick through, and it's going to say, hey, yeah. The only other thing that I will say I do here is I only change the toast notification. So they only get a new toast notification if the actual percentage has actually gone forward, the tool. So we don't want to just constantly keep popping it up every 2 minutes. So unless it hasn't changed, it doesn't display it. When it's changed, it'll display the latest status. Right, that's it. Any questions at all? Do you want me to put up? I'll put up my final slide because it'll tell you where to get the code. If you want to play with it, feel free. No warranty. Sorry? What do we do about BitLocker? We enforce that actually during the process of setting up, so during the device configuration, using CSPs. All of our autopiloted devices are pure AAD joined. Okay, we do not use any traditional domain join on them at all. So we've gone full in modern on these devices. So we prayed to the demo gods. It did work, thankfully, after a while. So how do you get it? And I'm new to GitHub as of Wednesday of last week when I copied the code up. Okay, so, and that's the only thing that's in there, but you can get it. The only thing I'll put up is the additional code, burnt toast. I did highlight it here. That's what's giving us the toast notifications, yeah? So I give them the recognition they deserve because it is really neat for doing toast notifications. And then the only other thing is CM trace compatible logging comes from there as well. I did make a few adjustments actually because we found that it was failing on some servers that we were using it on. So there are some slight adjustments, but that's what we got. Okay, any further questions?
If you want to spend, everyone else, if you want to spend 6, 12 months trying to work out what goes wrong with Autopilot, just do what you're doing. But if you want to make life a hell of a lot easier, this is what my next job and the last job could definitely do with.
Cool.
We don't have SCCM. We don't have half of this, and all of this is time. So you can spend days trying to install through Autopilot, but without the right logs, without the right text.
Laptop nearly went. Do you want the microphone, by the way, just to add in? Did everybody hear that? Because we can mic you up if not. Go on.
Thank you. It's more to say, in my last assignment, we had different people doing different things in different ways, not one person following like an organisational way of doing things. If you want to spend 6, 12 months fumbling around in the darkness, then carry on. But if you want to save that time, you probably change 6, 12 months worth of problems on the app deployment specifically. Follow the script that he's got, because that's all the pain that I've had for the last year on more than one assignment.
Yeah, I'd reiterate that actually. 90% of our issues are down to app deployments, probably. If you want an indication of how long it's taken us to get here, about 18 months. From start to finish. When we went autopilot, to go all in, we went totally modern, and like Rob was saying earlier with the security baselines and just importing your GPOs, I basically, being the lead of the team that actually implemented this, I was like, no way. Nothing gets carried across from the old system. If it is not listed in our security document as being a security requirement, or it's not in some good operational guide as to the reason why we're going to set something, it does not get set on the systems. We stopped configuring things like start menus, taskbars, background desktop pictures. Go through it. Anything that I like it, so my XYZ is set and it's pinned here and that's over here. No, we don't do it for you. You want that, you do it. Okay. But we don't do it. Nothing got carried over. So you said, actually, this is the book to read, by the way. MDM, Fundamental Security in the Modern Desktop. Okay, cool. Any other questions?